local. Okay. And do we want to test out 2 one more time?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. All right.
Hi, everyone. This is Stasia. I was wondering, could someone downgrade me to an attendee rather
Yes.
than a panelist?
Yep,
Yeah.
I will. Thank you for the reminder.
No
Thanks,
problem. Thank
Stasia.
you.
Thank you for being here.
Of course.
Hi, Caroline. Hi, Marcos. I
Okay.
think Chief Hawley's here. Hi, Cheryl.
And just so the webinar has started. It's now 6 o'clock. We have our slides up. And we have some attendees trickling in.
Can I go ahead, Val?
Yes, go ahead.
Should I go ahead, Val?
Yeah, you should.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hello, you have entered the Zoom room for the Environmental Justice Council. Please
Xin
hold for
chào mọi người đang tham gia cuộc họp thông qua.
Apologies for that. We hear our Mandarin interpreter, I think. Okay.
Please hold for a moment until more attendees have arrived and we are ready to
Vui
begin.
lòng chờ thêm một
meeting.
chút nữa trước khi nhiều
Hold on.
các
It
anh chị khác
happened.
tham gia.
Lulu can still. Is that Lulu that we hear?
It's the Vietnamese.
Oh,
Could you please switch it back to speaking to Vietnamese, please? So that you can't be heard on the English channel.
Hello, you've entered the Zoom room for the Environmental Justice Council.
Xin chào anh chị đang tham dự cuộc họp.
Could everyone please switch back to their own language channel? All attendees must select a language channel, even if viewing the presentation in English. The buttons for selecting a language channel or American Sign Language are at the bottom of your screen. Closed captioning has been enabled for this presentation. If you would like a translated version of the presentation slides, please go to the Environmental Justice Council website at the link in the chat. You will find a translated set of presentation slides there. Please hold for a moment until more attendees have arrived and we are ready to begin the meeting. Val, do you think we're ready? Should I go ahead?
yes.
Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Environmental Justice Council, whose members are appointed by the Governor's Office to advise the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, also called by the acronym EEA, about ways to promote and achieve environmental justice principles across the Commonwealth. I am Rishi Reddy, the chairperson of the council and the director of environmental justice at EEA. In addition to myself from EEA, we have Deputy EJ Director for Internal Agency Coordination, Valerie Cardozo, who is monitoring the question and answer function, also called the Q&A function. And we also have Carlene Lemoyne, our Deputy Director for External Stakeholder Coordination. You will also see on the screen the interpreters in 6 spoken languages and American Sign Language. We also have state staff and members of the public who are in attendance to observe and comment on the deliberations of the council. Next slide, please, Val. We are running 7 simultaneous interpretation channels in a Zoom webinar format. We'll take a few minutes now to review the logistics, agenda, and roll call. This meeting is being recorded and will later be available for viewing through a link that will be posted on the Environmental Justice Council website. That website appears in the chat. I remind the council members to please only use the chat function for meeting logistics and no other communication in accordance with the open meeting law. Okay. Next slide, please, Val. This presentation is available with interpreters in Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin, Haitian Creole, Vietnamese, and Cape Verdean Creole, and American Sign Language. When addressing the council, please speak slowly. Otherwise, the interpreters will not be able to keep up with you. We are doing something new today in that during our public participation section, interpretation will likely go 2 ways, from English into all of the different languages, as well as vice versa, when people from the public may comment in the language in which they are most familiar. Please know that a person participating in a non-English channel will be able to ask a question to the council. There will be more information about that during the public comment period, which will run from 6:20 to 7:10 today. Because of this, all participants, whatever language you speak, including English, must select a language channel at the bottom of your screen. Please do so now. It's right where the small globe is, appears at the bottom of your screen. If you don't choose a channel, English language viewers will not be able to hear interpreters when they address the council in English. A last reminder that translated versions of the presentation slides are available at the link on the Environmental Justice Council website. Next slide, please, Val. If you have a question regarding the clarification of meeting logistics as we go along, please type it into the question and answer box, where it can be answered by Deputy Director Cardozo immediately. I'm going to ask all members of the council to please put your name in the chat. We can see if we've reached quorum. I can't see everybody on the screen right now. But it looks like we do have quorum. Thank you very much. Here's the agenda for today. Does anyone on the council have any additional issues fitting within these topics that they would like to highlight at this time? I think so. Next slide, please, Val. The draft minutes for the November 21st meeting were emailed to council members so that you'd have a chance to review. I'd like some feedback. Does anyone have any amendments that they'd like to make to those minutes at this time? If not, I'd like to open the floor for a motion to adopt the minutes. And if anyone makes a motion or seconds it, please do state your name for the convenience of the minute takers. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes from the November 21st meeting?
I move to adopt the November 21st minutes. This is Lydia Lowe.
Thank you, Lydia. Do I have a second?
Melissa Ferretti, I could second that.
Thank you, Melissa. Under the rules for conducting remote public meetings under the Massachusetts Open Meeting Law, we must vote by roll call. So a simple majority vote is required to pass, and I'll now take a roll call to accept these minutes. Kalila Barnett is not here today, so I'll move on to Madeline Cook, please. Madeline, do you vote in favor of accepting these minutes?
Yes, in favor.
Thank you. Cheryl Holly, do you vote in favor?
In favor.
Caroline Hahn,
Yes.
Lydia Lowe. Lydia,
Yes.
did you make me? Thank you. Marcos Luna,
Yes.
Peter Mathe,
Yes.
Pat Spence,
Yes.
and Ari Zorn.
Yes.
Thank you, Ari, and I vote in favor. So please accept these minutes to be posted up as our formal minutes from the previous meeting. Let's move on to the next slide, please, Val. Announcements. We have a couple of important announcements today. The first is that we have been working towards making these meetings hybrid by request from council members. And we have recently employed a consultant who will be working with us to make these meetings hybrid in the future. We are hoping that the first hybrid meeting will be on January 25th. One thing that I would like to know, which we might, I might just take a quick survey here, or if people would like to email or put in the chat where they would like to meet. Please consider where the first hybrid meeting might be held. One option is that we hold it in Worcester, another could be in Boston. We can move around the state for sure. But any input about that would be very helpful to us. If you could email Valerie and CC me, that would be great. If you wanted to enter some options into the chat, we could take note of that as well. Into the Q&A, that would be fine as well. Thank you. Our option there with a hybrid meeting is to have as many people from the council available to meet in person as possible. And of course, if some can't make it, we will be using the hybrid option and having them come in that way. The next announcement is that this Thursday, the day after tomorrow, we will be holding the first in-person public listening session to receive comments on the new draft EEA-EJ strategy, which this council will be discussing as well in a few minutes. It will be from 6 to 8 p.m. at the UMass Amherst Center in Springfield. And there is information about that on the website under the EJ strategy heading. So please do come and attend in person if you live out in Springfield. We are having a Spanish interpreter and we will have materials available in translation in Spanish as well. Anything, and Valerie, you have just put in, I see the link to the EJ strategy. Thank you for that. Okay, next slide, please, Val. So for the next 50 minutes or so, 55 minutes or so, I would like to have some public comment come in from attendees who would like to speak with the EJ Council, submit comments to the EJ Council on the EJ strategy. We've set this up by request from several Environmental Justice Council members and from members of the public. And we scheduled a large part of this meeting for the public to express opinions, comments, and edits on the draft EJ strategy. And again, the strategy is available in the link. Please raise your hand or submit a comment. And now these are, this would be for attendees from the public to submit comments orally or through the Q&A function to the council. So please raise your hand or submit the comment through the Q&A function. Valerie will recognize your raised hand and call on you to speak. We will give priority to those with raised hands first, then go to the questions submitted in the Q&A in order to make the best use of the meeting time. If you submit a question via the Q&A button, Valerie will also give you the option of asking the question yourself if you so choose to do. Again, to those of you listening in on one of the non-English channels, please feel free to ask the question in your own language or to type the question in your own language. Our interpreters can accommodate you. If you are commenting orally and are a bilingual speaker, please make sure that you are in the desired language channel when you comment.
Rishi, before you continue, someone's having an issue entering the Spanish interpretation. Martha, can I just ask you to respond to the question in the Q&A box, and just to help this person get into the Spanish interpretation room? Thank you. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, that's all right, Valerie. Do we need to pause in order for that to happen, or should we go ahead?
If we can pause for just a moment. I'm gonna comment in this channel in Spanish, if that's okay. Vladimir, vimos su comentario de que no escucha nada. No sé si usted ha entrado en la función del español que se encuentra en el fondo de la pantalla. Se puede hacer clic en el globo y entrar en la canal de español. Okay, I'll go back to the Spanish channel.
Are we good, Martha? Yeah, we can go ahead. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Martha.
Okay, thank you. To audience members or panelists, please choose a language channel by clicking the globe at the bottom of your screen. Again, if you are an English speaker, please affirmatively choose the English channel. This will allow you to hear any comments made in another language and interpreted in English. Interpreters, please make sure your setting says, quote, listening in English and speaking to whatever language channel you're in. And I remind everyone again to please speak slowly so that the interpreters can follow you. There's a two-stage interpretation happening here through two languages for every comment that's being received. Thank you, and please have patience with us as we do this for the first time. And please go ahead and for audience members, raise your hand if you wish to comment on the EJ strategy or to enter a comment into the Q&A.
We have a question from Catherine Rodriguez. Catherine, I'm going to give you the ability to speak. And Catherine, you can go ahead. The delay might be if Catherine is speaking with our interpreter.
Trying to. Can you hear me?
Oh, there we go. Hi, Catherine.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
Hi, I'm just an ordinary citizen. I live in an environmental justice zone. Took a long time to find anything about an environmental justice zone. I'm just shocked that all of this is going on. But I read over, the draft, and how do you engage people? I don't see how, I live in an environmental justice zone. It's terrible here. I talk to a city councilor and I say environmental justice, and he says, I don't know anything about it. How do we get help? And where does it say that? I mean, these are nice, statistics or whatever, but how do you engage people? How does that happen? We've tried the Board of Health. We've tried various places. It just seems like it seems good on paper, but how do people get help for these things? Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. If I could just clarify, I don't know if Catherine just went off as a panelist, but the question, Catherine, was, how do you engage people in either your municipal or state governments to interact with the residents of the EJ neighborhood? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Just want to remind folks that they can also comment via the Q&A or orally, whatever the preference is.
And once again, if you'd like to ask a question orally, please raise your virtual hand and then I'll give you the permission to speak. We have a question from Noemi Rodriguez. And just a reminder, when providing your comment, please speak slowly and say your name again. We do have interpreters, so we do need to speak slowly so that they're able to keep up.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Noemi Rodríguez, soy una organizadora comunitaria de Raíces Verdes.
Good evening, my name is Noemi Rodriguez. I am an organizer with Green Roots and I live in Boston.
Soy organizadora en la iniciativa del área costera de East Boston.
I'm an organizer in East Boston.
Uno de mis comentarios es de que en los últimos tiempos han habido proyectos y desarrollos, la cual han venido tocando parte del medio ambiente y una de esas es la aprobación sin haber necesidad de la subestación eléctrica que hubo. Eso fue uno de los más claros ejemplos, ya que esta comunidad es una comunidad muy diversa en cuanto al lenguaje y a mí me gustaría estratégicamente pudieran poner dentro de la Junta Ambiental la justicia al lenguaje, ya que cuando hubo esta decisión y la aprobación de esta subestación eléctrica, cuando la Junta hace la aprobación, nosotros los residentes no sabíamos qué es tan peligroso y qué efecto negativo traía hacia nuestras vidas. Y eso fue una falta de respeto hacia nuestros derechos civiles, el no poder entender el plan o el proyecto que traían a una comunidad diversa, una comunidad de color. Y me gustaría ver, ¿verdad?, que como justicia ambiental trabajaríamos en el tema de la justicia lingüística para que nosotros dentro de la comunidad podamos entender estos temas tan amplios y tan peligrosos, no solamente para la salud, sino también para la humanidad y nosotros también como residentes de East Boston. Muchas gracias.
I'm an organizer in East Boston, and I want to talk about a development project that affected the environment. That was the approval of a substation, an electric substation, and it was approved in a very diverse community where there's a lot of language diversity, and it was approved by an environmental board without taking into account the question of language justice. So when the board approved this project, we in the community didn't know just how dangerous this substation project was. And it seems to me to be a great lack of respect for our civil rights when we didn't know what was contained in that plan as a community of color, as a community of wide language diversity. And so it's really important that we take linguistic justice into account so that the communities can understand these topics and they can understand the risks that they impose for their own health as well as for the health of the larger world.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rodriguez. Was it Noemi Rodriguez? Thank you so much, Ms. Rodriguez. And I just want to just state once again that in this process of public comment, we want to hear what folks have to say to us about the EJ strategy and the comments that we're taking in. We won't necessarily have answers for each and every comment as they come in. Our primary purpose is to hear where we need improvements and what can be done in people's experience. So I just wanted to reiterate in this process, it's a listening session, it's a public comment period. And what we are hoping to do with all of these comments is use them to edit the draft of the strategy so that the final draft will be able to incorporate these perspectives that we're hearing today.
And we have a question in the Q&A box. And David, if you'd like to say your question out loud, I'll give you a moment to raise your hand. If you don't put up your hand, I'll just go ahead and read it. So I'll just give you a moment to put up your hand if you'd like to answer, or sorry, or ask your question. All right, so I'll go ahead and just ask or provide David's comment. How does the Massachusetts EJ Council decide on EJ communities versus EJ populations that are affected by climate change, nutrient pollution, toxic chemical exposure, and municipal solid waste, which are managed by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs?
Valerie, I'm sorry, could I ask you to just repeat that for a moment? And I don't know if anybody on the council has any comments with regard to some of these perspectives that we're hearing. So I invite anybody to jump in with any type of comment or response. I don't want to be the gatekeeper here for communication, but I wonder if Val, could you just repeat that comment that came in?
Yeah. So once again, this is from David Dow. And thank you, David, for joining us again. I recognize your name. How does the Massachusetts EJ Council decide on EJ communities versus EJ populations that are affected by climate change, nutrient pollution, toxic chemical exposure, and municipal solid waste, which are managed by the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs?
So this entire process that we're undertaking right now, and this slot is about the EJ strategy, but you're right, we are looking at the way that we would define EJ communities. I'm not sure if I've captured that. And we don't have EJ populations is the definition that is in the statute that we're seeking to define. EJ communities is not really defined, whether by statute or by the EJ policy or in any other way. The way we use the word EJ communities right now is those are municipalities that contain an environmental justice population within them. So these are some distinctions in these terms, but this Environmental Justice Council is seeking to define EJ populations, and then also we'll be looking at the way in which climate change is affecting those populations as well.
And I see Lydia's hand is up.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to the first two comments from people and just, you know, encourage people to continue to engage, and that, you know, this is exactly the question that I have as a member of the EJ Advisory Council is, you know, it sounds great on paper when I read the strategy, but what does it really mean in real life? And a lot of us do have experience of seeing the opposite happening in real life. So I think that those are really good questions. And one input, you know, that I would suggest that's similar to what the first speaker was saying is that I think it's important for our state agencies and our state EJ task force to play an outreach and education role with municipalities who often are more close on the ground with neighborhood groups and residents than our state agencies, to really, you know, get out there and, you know, have people participate in decision making, hear what's happening, you know, and really, you know, figure out how to have an impact on improving our community's lives.
Thank you, Lydia. I think that's really a good point, and it is something that I am wanting to incorporate, I think, through all aspects, all chapters of the strategy as we go forward.
And we have a question from John Andrade. I'm going to give you permission to speak. All right. All right. Hi, buddy. You can go ahead.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for the invitation. I want to start off with two things first. We had a victory here in New Bedford. Reese, thank you very, very, very much. They did not explode the tower today. That was burnt coal ash for over 40 years, and they were going to explode it today, and it was canceled. I don't know why yet, but thank you. And secondly, it was so good to see the screen and see all of the different folks on here representing the entire state of Massachusetts in a way that I'm so proud of, because I hear and see the different linguistics that we're using to make sure that people, all people, are being informed about what's going on in their neighborhoods, or having the opportunity to know what's going on in their neighborhoods and understand it in their language and in their feelings and their understanding, then be able to express that back to government officials about what they feel and the injustices that are happening in their neighborhoods in their language. At the same time that I promote this and talk about it and the victories that we've had here in New Bedford around it, I also emphasize to everyone that we also must understand this in English as well. You know, the linguistic piece is very important. Understanding this stuff in English is very, very important, so that we can be more politically involved in all aspects of this. Outreach and awareness is so important. Now, I have an example here in the city of New Bedford called Parallel Products. This is going to be another one of those dumps or landfills with sludge and all that kind of stuff. Very similar that we already have a landfill here, and you probably have in your neighborhoods. But they're going to put this one in a neighborhood that is pretty much pristine. It has an industrial park that abuts it. has been pretty clean, looks very nice and beautiful. The single family homes, playgrounds, schools, a very nice community. And they call it an environmental justice neighborhood. We do not. However, where there is a landfill on Shaman Avenue, where we have 3 housing projects, Nashmont, Presidential, Brickywood, some single family homes, they don't call that an environmental justice neighborhood. And yet we have all this trash, all this stuff that goes on in that area. And it does not get the attention that this other neighborhood is getting around environmental justice. Now, let me say this. What Parallel Product is going to do to that neighborhood is make it an environmental justice neighborhood. We have to support the Parallel Products group that is working to stop that project from coming there. Because if we don't, it will become an environmental justice community because people will move out, property values will go down, the stench will rise, the traffic, the diesel, all of the things that we're fighting in other neighborhoods to stop, they're trying to create right there in this neighborhood. And it's a wonderful neighborhood. And the state needs to intervene and stop this project from developing there in this particular community and help areas like Presidential Heights, where they live with the junk every day from the airport to other issues, and with very little action for them. We talk about the strategy. The law, part of the strategy is the law. And right now, the federal law is not working directly with state law or state law working with federal law. EPA on the federal level has made environmental justice a civil rights issue. President Biden has passed executive orders to call for Justice 40, so there's 40% benefit going to the communities, going to us in the neighborhoods, us in the front lines, and not those big box companies coming in, taking the money, running away with it, and saying, look what we did for those people, and nothing happened. Justice 40 needs to be part of this strategy. The law, as from a civil rights perspective, needs to be part of this strategy, and the state has to say, you're breaking the law. So when we do that, now we have to talk about enforcement. That's why the lady was saying she went to her city council, you don't know what she was talking about, because none of them want to know what we're talking about. Just like affirmative action, they don't want to know about affirmative action. They just put that little equal opportunity thing on the bottom because of the law. We need the law. Our city councils need to know that if you're not going to enforce the civil rights of environmental justice in our neighborhoods, then we're going to stop the money. We're going to talk about the funding. We're going to talk about the mitigations, the fines and the things that make them want to learn about the law and protect their constituents. The law has to be part of this. Enforcement has to be a big part. And then I'll talk about engagement. Engagement, the outreach and work that has to be done in our communities under Justice 40, under something that maybe the governor is going to do or the Attorney General office is going to do, creating environmental justice grants that reach those environmental justice groups to do the engagement, to do the awareness, to do the education, bring everybody together, all the different languages. We're a community. Everywhere I go in my neighborhood, there's all kinds of different languages, all kinds of different smells of food. But we're all suffering from the same environmental pollutions and toxins and other things that affect the quality of our lives. So I thank everybody for this opportunity. And I have to say that we have to make our departments like DEP in the regional areas do their job. Work for the community, not work for those who are causing the pollution. And that is a problem here in our community. We have a regional group that is not doing its job. I want to thank the Attorney General's office. I want to thank the Executive Office of Environmental Energy Affairs, Ms. Reedy, for all the work that we were able to do over the last couple of weeks in regards to this implosion. But more importantly, engaging with us over the last 20 months and bringing together two very important meetings to establish an Environmental Justice Council for the Greater New Bedford area, one back in April and one just the other night on December 7th here in New Bedford, in a rainy, stormy night that over 35 people braved and came out, and 9 of those folks from Boston, from the federal state agencies and EPA, to talk about how to help New Bedford build a strong environmental justice organization, which we need in every part of the state, that we come together and work together as everybody from Springfield, Worcester, Pittsburgh, Falmouth, and New Bedford, and Fall River, Brockton, come together as a state and talk about environmental justice as it affects each one of our neighborhoods, and do it the way they do it. They go nice conferences, the whole 9 yards, possibly put some money to it, put the money to it. Let's make it happen for the people.
Thanks so much, Buddy. I heard you make points around the enforceability of the strategy, how it would be, how it could have some of the force of law behind it. I heard you make comments around engagement, how folks living in the communities would be able to engage with the government and get their attention, get staff people in both the state and municipal governments to get their attention. And a reminder for all of the agencies that are in the strategy about working for the community and the residents, and to keep that in mind primarily. Thank you.
All right, and then we have a question from Vladimir Perez. I'm gonna allow Vladimir to speak. Just a reminder to please speak slowly. And there are some folks who will be asking questions using an interpreter, so we'll just need some time for the interpreter to switch language channels. So just expect a few seconds delay. But Vladimir, you can go ahead and provide your comment.
Buenas noches a todos. Mi nombre es Vladimir Pérez. Como lo mencionaron, yo estoy a favor de la justicia ambiental y creo que es muy importante en estos tiempos, ya que pues que con el cambio climático estamos viendo los efectos de todos los problemas ambientales que han habido, y al haber una justicia ambiental, la comunidad está bien informada cómo puede actuar en alguna situación que le está afectando como residente de una ciudad. Entonces, yo creo que para que también dentro de la justicia ambiental haya una forma mejor de acercar a la comunidad, es que dentro de las mayorías de audiencias haya una justicia lingüística también, porque como el problema que se dio en la aprobación de la planta eléctrica en East Boston, se hizo una audiencia, pero la audiencia solo fue en inglés, y residentes que no hablamos el inglés no tuvimos acceso a todo lo que se estaba discutiendo. Entonces, no supimos dar nuestro punto de vista, si eso nos afectaba o no, porque como un estado donde hay una diversidad cultural y lingüística, se debería de incluir esa parte para que toda la comunidad esté involucrada en lo que les está afectando, y creería que eso sería muy importante, que dentro de las audiencias que afectan a la población en justicia ambiental o en cualquier otro rama, que haya una justicia lingüística. Gracias, y les agradezco por todo el trabajo que están haciendo en base a la justicia ambiental, que es beneficio para nosotros y para las generaciones venideras.
Okay, good evening. My name is Vladimir Perez. And as you know, I want to thank you. As I mentioned, I'm here in favor of environmental justice. It's particularly important in this time, especially as we're seeing the negative effects of climate change. And when we talk about environmental justice, that means that the community must be informed about how to reach out to decision makers, and citizens must be informed when a situation affects them. So for instance, when we're talking about this environmental justice theme, there has to be a better way for communities to get in touch with agencies, and it has to include linguistic justice as well. So for instance, if we look at the topic of the electrical plant that was implemented in East Boston, there was a hearing, but it was only offered in English. And so therefore, linguistically diverse communities weren't able to participate. They weren't able to know how the situation would affect them, or give their points of view or express themselves. So this is a state that has the benefit of being linguistically and culturally diverse. And so we need to include that in any situation so that everyone, all the residents, can participate. So that needs to be true whether it's on environmental justice or in any area, so that everyone can participate. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing for environmental justice. It's something that's really important and will benefit us now as well as generations to come.
Thank you so much, Mr. Perez. I heard you say these aspects highlighting the negative effects of climate change, and because of that, the necessity of Massachusetts residents to be informed on how to reach out to decision makers. There needs to be a better way for residents to be in touch with the agencies, especially with regard to language justice, which the prior commenter, Noemi Rodriguez, also commented on the aspects of language justice and how to keep people informed on interacting with state government. And you used the example of the East Boston substation to illustrate how people did not know how to interact with the decision makers there, and that there was not adequate communication coming from decision makers there to the residents of East Boston.
And then we have a question from Rob Zidek. Sorry if I said your last name incorrectly, but I'll allow Rob to speak. All right, Rob, you can go ahead. Sure. You'll have to unmute yourself, Rob, if you.
Sorry.
No worries.
Okay, let me find my thing. Good evening, council and fellow attendees. I sincerely appreciate all that you do. My name is Rob Zidek. I live in Lancaster. I have just a few questions about affordable housing development. I ask these as food for thought for tonight or in the future as you develop this strategy. Are planned affordable housing developments under Chapter 40B or 40R considered environmental justice communities by default? If so, how do we meaningfully involve our future neighbors in early development decisions when they do not live here yet? Are there advocates on whom we can call in the early application process? How can we better infuse EJ considerations into Department of Housing and Community Development, DHCD, or mass housing eligibility applications? For example, when these affordable housing projects are proposed adjacent to existing or concurrently developed high truck traffic industrial businesses. Can we get Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, MEPA, involved as an EJ policy evaluator in these early DHCD and mass housing applications. Thank you very much for all of your consideration.
Thank you so much, Mr. Zidek. I heard comments from you about the intersection of environmental justice and affordable housing development, in particular, Chapter 40B, Chapter 40R. A request or perhaps a comment about how DHCD could be more involved in this environmental justice strategy. That agency is mentioned in the strategy. And it sounds like your comment is highlighting, well, is that enough? What are the more specific ways that they could be considered? Especially with once residents move into a 40B project or a 40R project, how does it affect the definition of EJ neighborhood going forward?
We have a comment in the Q&A. I think it's sort of in response to other comments provided around engagement. This is from David Dow. I'll go ahead and read this one. I've been engaged with the Superfund / Safe Drinking Water Act cleanup at Joint Base Cape Cod for over 25 years, which is being addressed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, and the Massachusetts Environmental Management Commission in Barnstable County and town governments, which have their own EJ engagement policies with local residents on the front lines.
Could we ask Mr. Dowd, are there aspects of that process that he would suggest should be incorporated into the strategy? Is that how he's raising those?
I'm not sure, but David, if you wanted to respond, you can raise your hand. I can give you permission to speak, or you can go ahead and just type in the Q&A again. I don't see a raised hand or another question in Q&A, but if it does pop up, I'll just let you know.
Thanks, Valerie.
David commented again. Once again, this is from David Dow. There needs to be better coordination between these diverse EJ engagement actions.
Thank you. So I take that to mean the actions going on at the federal level and the state level, the federal Superfund actions in the state level. One thing I want to ask the council about, is if there's any comments that they've heard tonight so far that's influenced the way that they've looked at the strategy. I've noticed a few parallels here around residents knowing how to engage with the government, and also the language justice issues. If any folks on the council had anything that they wanted to raise around that in terms of the way that they've looked at the strategy themselves, that could enhance the conversation or even the public comment as it comes in, please join in.
I see Pat's hand is up and then Marcos after.
My comment is in line with what I've heard several times is, and I think what we're doing on this particular call is wonderful, having interpreters, just a wonderful step to make sure we're being inclusive. But it always comes down to, do the neighbors on my street in Dorchester know what we're up to here on this call? How does all of this translate to the person next door to all of us? And if we are all going to think about it and use even the term environmental justice, I'm not sure every one of my neighbors would know what that means and what that's about. And so how at some point do we make sure that the policy decisions and things that we're looking at in the strategy, how does it always translate to the person next door? That's it. That's always my concern.
This is Marcos. So I think I'm just to echo Rishi's observation too about the themes that we're hearing from the people who commented so far, that engagement with the community. I think one of the things I thought was good in the proposed strategy that's worth replicating for the MEPA process, or for MEPA, which I just blanked. It's Massachusetts Environmental Protection Act.
Policy Act.
Policy Act.
Very close.
Very close. I'm in the vicinity.
You're not the first one to say that, Marcos.
Yeah, I just know it's MEPA. So one of MEPA's strategies that they outlined in their portion of the larger strategy document were these public meetings where they're specifically educating the public on how to engage in the process so that they can talk to the agency and understand how it works, which I think is great. I think that's something that most agencies should probably adopt. And certainly too, agencies also need to learn how to interact with the community in a way that makes sense to the community, rather than the community having to adapt itself to the, what can be very arcane rules about how you engage with a public agency. So I think that there's a little bit of movement on both ends, but certainly the initial outreach, I think, is an easy thing to kind of latch onto and to do, to teach public how it works and how they get involved.
I feel that it's reflected in Pat's comment as well. Do the neighbors on the street know what's happening? It's almost as if we're hearing, we might have all of these formal processes about how to engage, and we might have this formal strategy and whatnot, but we sort of don't have the forums in which people could actually do the engaging. It almost seems like that. I mean, I don't want to cut off any input from, I see that Madeline has raised her hand. I don't want to cut off any input from the public, please, just because the council is speaking now. So this is one of those forums, I think we need to have it be more porous. I mean, we're sort of modeling what we're talking about right here. We don't, so. Madeline, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I also wanted to just comment that it's not just giving folks an understanding of how to engage or engaging them, but it's also the content of that engagement. In the two comments on language justice, both alluded to or even said directly that the plans for the substation that were being discussed, there was not a lot of understanding or translation about the negative impacts on health, on community of that particular project. And that's, you know, it was raised up as an example, but I think you could probably find other examples where there are projects that are being proposed. There might or might not be community engagement or even language access. But even if there is language access, some of the, you know, how do you make the information that's being presented more accessible, just from a technical perspective or an impact perspective? I think that's, you know, that's another part of the engagement piece. It's not just thinking through what the process is, but thinking through the process and the content. What is really important for people to understand and have knowledge about, so that they can engage and they can give feedback. I think Mr. Perez was saying that, you know, without a full understanding what the impacts are of the project, that there was not an opportunity for people that don't speak English to give their viewpoint on that particular project. So I think we need to think about that. And I 100% agree that that we can go through the policies and put the best policy down on paper, but we also need to really push on the implementation side. How do we ensure that those good ideas that have garnered feedback actually are followed up on and implemented, so that we're achieving the goal of that policy?
Thank you, Madeline.
And then before Ari's comment, we did get a comment in the Q&A from David Dow again. I'll just quickly read it. There's just he sent us some groups in the Cape area that do address EJ concerns. I think he just wanted to share that with the public. The Cape Cod Commission and towns of Falmouth / Mashpee also address EJ concerns. The Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative Faith Community Environmental Network engages with EJ populations on climate crisis locally. And then just a reminder to everyone speaking, the public and panelists, please remember to just speak slowly and say your name before you speak, so that our interpreters and our meeting minute takers are able to follow along. Thank you. But Ari, you can go ahead.
Hi, Ari Zorn. Kind of echoing what everybody's saying. It seems like a very common issue in our society, whether it's race, environment, anything, is who do you reach out to? So I don't care whatever the language barrier is, once you have an issue, who goes to bat for you? Where do you go, and who truly listens? Are we that group? Are we, when someone has a complaint, like the man John came forward and had a lot to say, and it looks like, Rishi, that you stepped in, someone stepped in and they helped out, who becomes the voice for these communities? Because I know what it's like. I mean, one person stands up about a situation in their community and they're all alone, and they normally get stonewalled. How do they reach a board like us who looks at what their complaint is or what the issue is, and then goes to bat for them? I think that's another big issue, a big topic that should be thrown in to the mix of all of this.
So Ari, I just want to address that, because I think it's also it also goes to what Madeline was saying as well of what we did and have been doing in New Bedford is New Bedford has managed to, through John Andre's, Buddy Andre's leadership and others in the community, have pulled in a number of state and federal agencies, EPA Region 1, us, the Attorney General's office, to go down to New Bedford and engage with some of the community-based organizations down there. So it takes such a high level of organization to be able to do that. That's a barrier, you know, that type of organization, to be able to get a groundswell of support around a particular issue. And then I think about what one of the, I think our first commenter, Ms. Rodriguez, Ms. Catherine Rodriguez, she said, how do you, she didn't know, she felt like she didn't know how to go and effectively speak with folks to talk with in her city or town about being in an EJ zone. So this is there's such a gap, I think, between the way that government is interacting with the residents of these EJ neighborhoods. And how do we close that gap? So perhaps some of what was in that MEPA part of the strategy is part of it, going out, perhaps more of the EEA agencies should have that type of plan to go out into communities, whether it be for trainings or whether it be to get information back from the community in a way that we're not now, in a more informal way. I don't know, this is, instead of just in these formal structures of there's a rule making, we're promulgating regulations, we're citing a facility. These are all very constrained ways that people interact with government. I mean, I don't know, I'm hearing that sort of across so many of the comments today.
Yeah.
I think, Valerie, we only have time for one more question from the public before, on our strategy and on our agenda, we would switch over to the council's discussion of the EJ strategy based on our background documents. So, perhaps we could think a little bit about that, but there's time for one more question, I think, maybe two, if people had some.
There's not a question, but a response to Ari's comments from Bonnie Bain. I did ask for a clarification from Bonnie in the Q&A. So Bonnie, if you can, just take a look or raise your hand and you can say it out loud. I'll give you a moment to do that before I read your comment. I'll go ahead and read it, and then if Bonnie wants to provide a clarification in the chat, I can go ahead. But so Bonnie found the staff so helpful of this organization when she needed to file a MEPA comment letter for the wind port in Salem. Thank you for making yourselves available. Credit to Buddy Andrade for directing Salem Alliance for the Environment on where to go. It's a whisper network right now.
you. Any other last minute?
Okay, and so what I asked Bonnie was what organization she was referring to, and she said she believed it was our staff, so I'm assuming it was probably you and Carlene that might have helped out with that. So Bonnie says thanks.
Okay. If there's no more comments, then I think we could move on to the next topic here, which was the EJ Council's discussion specifically of the EJ strategy. Are we all in agreement? Should we move on? I just want to perhaps see some nodding of heads that we're ready to go on. Okay. Okay. So the EJ Council has reviewed the draft strategy over the past 3 weeks since our last meeting. And they have individually mailed to us at EEA, to Valerie and myself, some initial impressions of the strategy. We've consolidated those comments into one document and removed the authors' names from those. The document is available at the link that Valerie will now post in the chat. And you can find it under the headings, Documents for Discussion, on that page. So the following discussion will draw from that document, as well as from the valuable comments that we just heard from the public. So one thing I apologize for is that because of the late date of the submission we just did not have enough time to turn it around in order to be able to translate the document that we're using for this discussion into all of the languages that we usually do. They will be translated and placed on the website just as soon as we get them back from the translators. We don't have them for this discussion. We only have them in English for now. So I wanted to open it up to see what council members had to say about these topics. I consolidated those topics into the formal, these following subjects. Those are any future changes to the strategy, how they would be noticed to the public. A large set of comments came in on community engagement. A large set of topics came in on metrics and measurements of progress towards EJ goals, which I think is an important one. Certainly, people commented on training, how also every agency's environmental justice committee was going to do their work. And a topic about state resources, how periodic updates to the strategy would be handled. And then lastly, there were special comments that pertained to each of the specific offices. So I'm not sure exactly how we can tackle some of these topics in this discussion. If there were, I would like to take notes on the ones that people felt were most pressing. So if members of the council could raise the topics that they particularly wanted to discuss at this point, we could make a list of the ones that felt especially pressing that we could speak about here. That might be one way to do it. If I were to suggest some, I think that the issues around metrics and how we would keep track of environmental justice progress and also figure out what baseline we were starting from is a very important topic. And if there were additional topics that we wanted to address that way. And then I also thought that the large aspect of community engagement might be something we want to talk about as well. So, but I want to open it up to see if people had other pressing topics that they felt they wanted to address in this forum. And I think we could take this slide down, Valerie, so we could just see each other. And I'm also happy if folks think that we should, I'm happy to share on my screen, we could share this document so that we can be looking at it as we're discussing, either way. Madeline, I see your hand up.
Sorry, Rishi, that I didn't lower it electronically.
Oh, okay, okay.
There's always one in a meeting.
At least. Yeah. Valerie, if we could take this slide down, I think it would be good to see people on the screen. So let me just start out with, well, before I launch in, I do want to give folks a chance to say what they felt were the most important topics to them as they looked at that document.
I see Ari's hand is up.
Yes, Ari. I don't know if it's most important. A lot of the topics are important on there, but the fair disbursement of funds and grants in EJ communities, making sure that an equal amount of funds are going to the proper places, it's very important to me.
Okay, and Ari, I want to take it because we have a goal here of by the next time we meet, we would be able to have some type of agreed upon set of comments from the EJ Council to submit to EEA as being on the strategy. I mean, I'm proposing that we might go down this list. Ari, as you've said, the grant disbursement issue, I think plugs into some of the resources, but I don't think it was actually, it didn't, we could go through each of these major subjects that were listed on this document and talk about if we agreed upon how they were stated and whether we would change that comment. That might be one way in which we could go about this. Let me share that document. Maybe it would help for folks to see it and we could go through it that way. And Ari, I think I'm going to actually, at the right time, add what you just said to this piece. But is that something does that seem like a way to tackle this problem of so much information and then being on a Zoom call? I'm trying to get to a practical goal of what can we get enough clay together here so that we can sculpt out our comments in the next 5 weeks, and how would we do that between this meeting and the next? So let me just put that up there, open to other ideas. So I'm hoping, did that actually work? Yeah, and I'll make it. Val, are you better doing this than I am? I think you might be.
I think you got it. I see it. Are you trying to zoom in?
Still see it? Okay, yeah. So is it still being shared right now?
Yeah, I can see
Okay.
what you're sharing.
And do you see just that screen or, okay, there we
Yeah.
go.
I just see that screen.
Okay, great. Okay, so one thing we might do is, I'll leave this up there. I don't think that's so I want to talk about the community engagement piece, unless folks had other ways of tackling this. What we might do is just, if this is a set of comments that we have about community engagement, I can take notes as we go along about things that folks might add to this. So for the first, and I'll speak slowly for the interpreters. Consider paying communities to engage with the permitting process. Not everyone has the financial flexibility to participate, and this is a barrier to engagement. So I would, to be practical about this, a question I have is this a comment towards a specific agency? Did it comment towards a specific process across all of the agencies? This is what I mean by, is there a way that we can talk about these issues that has practical application to the strategy? Marcos, I see your hand up.
Well, I think it's an interesting and a great idea. It's certainly becoming more common practice in funded projects by either private or government agencies that you assist the capacity of the community to participate. So one way that this could be done that might be, pretty familiar to a lot of government agencies would be to provide targeted technical assistance grants or other programming that would specifically be about helping the community work through a project that's being vetted or that's going through a permitting process. So I think it's in concept, it's a good idea, because I think this is one of the elements of capacity. A lot of people in communities are paid by the hour, and so giving up time to go participate is costly, not just in terms of their personal time, but also in terms of economically, it has a real effect on them. So I think it's a great idea. And I think there's different ways of doing it.
Okay. Any other comments on that? I'll move on to the next. So to have pop-up offices across the state and go directly to the people. We do have, out of the EEA office, we do have a parallel aspect with how MVP coordinators are working in various regions. I don't know if council members are aware of that piece, or I can't, and again, I mean, this was one particular comment, so clearly somebody is aware of it. But create regional strategies. I'm moving on to the next for different parts of the state, identifying what are the key environmental justice challenges and how departments can work collaboratively to address. So I heard Ari for sure speak about how issues out in the western part of the state are have a different set of challenges than in the other parts of the state, but and I see Cheryl nodding her head. So
I agree with these comments, and I also wonder, because I don't think most of us, have a lot of popular engagement with state agencies. And are they really set up for that? I don't know. Do they have the personnel that are really focused on that work? So it's not I don't have a suggestion. It's just a question I have, because it hasn't, in my experience in the community, we just don't interact with state agencies much. So I do feel like, some of those in the EJ strategy, some of those departments had more extensive ideas and plans than others. So my comment was, I hope that they share them across departments and really learn from each other. And then, I'm wondering, yeah, I think that the training piece is really important too, for their staff to really understand this EJ strategy. But I don't know what, what's the budget connected to doing the community engagement for, I mean, one is that paying the community people, but even for the staff people, is this just like something that's tacked on to their work, but is not really the heart of their work? I don't know.
Tell me if I'm capturing this, Lydia. Is there a budget for doing community engagement? And is this central to the work? And this piece of it is essential to the work of the agency. That makes me think of what is it that the staff are, that's a cultural change in terms of the way that an agency can function. Are they a permitting agency, or are they primarily going to be interacting with communities to find out how permitting might be done in a community, or if it's wanted, or how it could be wanted? Any other pieces here on the community engagement? Let me just read these last two pieces. Language is mentioned a lot, as well as use of technology. In addition to language access and use of social media, we should add the use of alternative and ethnic multilingual media, including different social media platforms used by immigrant groups. I don't think this would be negated by anybody here. I mean, this seems. And then the last one, how does the public, especially environmental justice communities, learn about planning, projects, and programs? Some departments seem to have thought this through more than others. Hope that they share those outreach and engagement strategies across departments. I think that's what you were talking about, Lydia, that it was, and this is actually reflected in some of the comments we heard today, to not, that residents don't know a way to learn about planning and the projects and the programs going forward. So I just want to, we have about a half, yeah.
Rishi, I just wanted to add, just underscore that for the agencies to truly do this work, it takes someone who has ownership of the community engagement process at each of the agencies. And I know that there are various folks that are, community engagement folks, but it's a lot of work to do community engagement right. You can check a box and said you did community engagement, that you sent out a notice for people of when the meeting was, but to truly do effective community engagement, it takes much more follow-up and it takes time and effort. So if you don't have staff that has that time and has that in literally their work plan as a priority, then it could get lost in the shuffle, and we know how busy everybody is. So I think it's worth underscoring that it takes really intentional planning and funding at the agency level to have someone do good community engagement, have it be their job, and be responsible for it being effective. And if it's not effective, then that there's somebody who's thinking about how to improve community engagement. So I would say that's really critical, and that starts getting to the implementation piece, right? That that we've been talking about throughout this call, about nice things on paper that are really solid and well thought through, but it's ultimately kind of the implementation piece that really needs to be lifted up and supported and supported with funding.
Thank you for that, Madeline. I think that's a really good point.
I see Pat's hand is up.
I think Madeline said it so well, so I concur. I would also add to all of this that with all of the different ways and the social media and the technology, sometimes I just have to go to, X amount of organizations in that neighborhood or that EJ community. I mean, I've got to look and say there's 10 key organizations. Let me find out when their meetings are. All of this is work and needs funding, but when are their meetings? And then bringing, of course, whatever interpreters there to share whatever is going on in this space. It is a lot of work, but that's what it takes. That's what it takes. The other thing that was interesting, which I've never thought of before, is again, when we look at disseminating information, there's a lot of historical information that's held within our seniors that have had to live many of these environmental issues, live it, raise their children within these environmental issues in our EJ communities. When we look at how to access people, there's no separate layer that says, how are we accessing our seniors? Again, folks that potentially have been historically through a lot of environmental justice travesties in their neighborhoods, for lack of a better word. So I've got to go look at the plan again, but do we have a plan to get to our seniors as well? Because it might not be social media, it might not be technology, it might be going to specific organizations, it might be working with elder commissions, but how are we getting to those folks that maybe have experienced a lot of the issues?
And Pat, I think you're raising that as a particular technique that, say, if there were agency staff that were assigned that had ownership over the community engagement piece,
Sure.
That those individuals would use this as an additional technique. Like, yes, you go to the community, you go to the CBO, the community-based organization there, but let's not overlook these elders in the community that actually lived it. And I think that's not something we do for sure. I mean, I haven't heard about that. So I think that's really useful point. If I'm looking at this, we have about, I'd like to leave a few minutes at the end to talk about the process by which we might go into the next meeting. So if folks don't mind, I want to jump over to metrics, unless there was another pressing issue of these general subjects. I think the metrics are really important, and I think they're going to be different for different neighborhoods sometimes, but there's some overarching things that we definitely want to look at, and we need folks' expertise about this. So I also want to say, for those of you who submitted substantial pieces on the metrics, I really appreciated that. It's a difficult topic for us. So I can, we have a lot here. I don't think that reading through this is the best way to talk about the metrics piece, but if folks wanted to raise some of the most pressing issues, I think this would be appropriate. This is what has been highlighted so far in some of what the strategy says, that the report that that EEA would issue on their annual environmental justice report would include things like the amount of public funds or publicly leveraged funds that were used, fiscal year agency and program spending on projects benefiting EJ neighborhoods. So those pieces are tied to money and finances. Another way that we could think about numbers was the EJ trainings hosted and attended by EEA and its agencies. Internally, our demographic information on diversity hiring was a fourth issue that was highlighted in the strategy. And the number of public hearings and meetings that were hosted in EJ neighborhoods. Now, these things seem to be a bit superficial to me. I mean, they're easily translatable into money, but I would like to go a little deeper. So I'd like to open that up for comment. And just let me scroll down a little bit here to some of these issues. So if anybody wanted to jump in on aspects of this, I think we need to get the metrics piece of this right. And the way to establish a baseline also is a key component of this. I think there's a couple of raised hands. Should we say Marcos and then Pat, please?
I think Pat just left her hand.
Oh, okay.
Right.
All right. Yeah.
All right, well, then I'll take the default then. So I think that on the metrics, the main thing that calls my attention is measuring the outcomes of whatever projects are being pursued by the respective agency or secretariat. So certainly the funding allocation is one kind of outcome, but I also think that things like enforcement actions or citing decisions or anything that has a material outcome, regardless of why or how well the community was engaged or not, we'd like to be able to know what happened and how it's happening across the state so that we could see whether, outcomes are equitable or inequitable, because I think even with good intentions and good processes, you can still end up with bad outcomes, unfortunately. So I would want to be able to see that. So that's kind of a larger overall statement about what I think is important to include here. And that was the main one that caught my attention. And I always add, because I'm a professor of geography, I want to know where everything's happening. So everything should be tied to location, so that that's another way to see, for example, is Western Massachusetts getting the attention it needs, and how and where is that happening, as we would, in the eastern and the dense urban areas.
I mean, Ari brought up the issue about grant disbursement, which is of course tied to money. But what I don't know is, if we were to look at some of the things that you just articulated, Marcos, they're qualitative and they're not easily quantifiable. So this is something that perhaps every agency needs to grapple with on their own. But I don't know. I feel like as yet we haven't done enough thinking about that. Like, how could that be done?
Well, just a response to that real quickly. I think a lot of them are quantifiable, because a lot of these decisions involve some kind of action or decision, and any kind of action or decision can be, described or counted up and located in terms of where it happens. And so I think there's an element of it that can be quantified. That's the low-hanging fruit. I'd say the quantifying part. The qualitative part is the hard part, obviously. So I agree with you completely that there's probably a lot that won't be easily, but I think we should at least go after the low-hanging fruit initially. And so I have plenty of ideas on what you can count. That's one thing I do all day long in my job. So I'll stop.
Yeah. Cheryl, I see your hand up.
I think I'm just really echoing Marcos and you. I mean, outputs are great, and measuring those outputs are wonderful, but you can have as many trainings or meetings or hand out as many flyers as you like, but if there's no change, if the outcome is zero or negative, then it's not helping those communities at all. You know, all that has gone to waste, basically. So I think trying to find a way to measure outcomes is even more important than measuring outputs.
One thing that I'm thinking about is if we did it, are we saying when we talk about enforcement and citing, does that become something that we would then look at geographically on a map to say that's how we actually, how proportionately were the enforcement actions taken? How will the citing decisions spread out across the state? I mean, that is, I guess, something we could see visually. And I'm trying to think of the ways that you would translate that into what is the quality of those enforcement actions, though? What was it? Were they just NONs? Were they? I see Caroline's hand up.
Rishi, I understand what you're saying. I mean, the challenge is like, how do you get at some of the quality measures, and as we're thinking about the outcomes overall, and I wasn't sure whether it might be, as we've been thinking about, as we've been discussing, I've been listening, how we might think about coming back to just even defining without quantification necessarily, like what are the outcomes that we're really trying to achieve through the strategy. So is it, is equitable and accessible process, and in that, then you can actually let's say that if we agree that's one, or it's fair decision making, and you can look at it and say, how would I ensure fair decision making? You want to have diversity of the decision making body, for example, and then you could measure that. Or if it's equitable process and accessible process, then you can kind of map in your measurements around, are you scheduling your public meetings at accessible times, or how much are we doing translation? What's the quality of the translation? And it's almost like we could map the metrics themselves that are proposed into the desired outcomes of the overarching strategy and see where there might be some things that are missing. And I recognize, like, I didn't look at it in that way but as we're thinking about it, I don't know if that might be a useful way of thinking about it. And then, if we're even getting down to just overall environmental impact, then do you actually even go so far as to say there's like emissions per block and how you might map that on the map itself? And so I wonder if we might, it's not necessarily an answer here, but we might consider, as we're looking to make sure it's the right balance of the metrics, if we can pull out from the overarching strategy, what are the main things that we really are trying to drive from a priorities perspective, and then look at the metrics themselves and how they actually map into it. Because I think some of those will be these output metrics, but if you can map those outputs to the outcome itself, then it might be enough. In other cases, we might need to actually add more specific around the outcome, if that makes sense at all.
So are you proposing, Caroline, that those decisions of what are the main things that we're really trying to drive, if that would be something that every agency or program would decide for themselves? I mean, it could be very different for different programs.
It could, or if they're or potentially even just top down from the overall EEA, are there just big things that you want to make that every department needs to have that drive it, so that it doesn't have to be every process is the same, but if every process has to be equitable, then they can map their metrics into which of those are the ones that actually drive equity and fairness in the process. And they will be different. I mean, I think that is part of it, because the things that each department does are very different. But if you can map that over to kind of the strategic outcomes of your strategy, it may help identify where you have gaps or where there are commonalities that you might that could come out. I think the matrix that someone had nicely put together is a great way to start there. And then you can almost just take that and say, okay, which of these are related to accessibility, if that's an overarching goal here.
Could we discuss the matrix a little bit and see if people had responses to it? I won't put anybody on the spot about who made it unless they wanted to volunteer, but could we have a little bit of a response around the matrix and the way that it's played these pieces out?
Are you scrolling down to the matrix? It hasn't updated on my side, so I didn't know.
Oh, I just did. Okay, so let me just see, what am I doing wrong here? No, I am so bad at this. Okay. Okay, did that work? No. How do I get it to, it's pausing my screen share, so I don't know how to.
There's an option to resume your screen share at the toolbar where you started sharing your screen.
Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, now I see.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So I think this matrix, the way that it's looking at things that are quantifiable and it's spread out across each of the 12 entities that we're looking at, and it's captured the things that are in common amongst all of them right here. And then here's the places where the agencies diverged from each other. So, and I think that the way that it was constructed was that everything on the left here, this is a articulation of everything that was spotted in the strategy as a possible way to quantify a metric. So I don't know if one way to look at this is we can look down this slide, this column here on the far left, and think about, hey, should all of the agencies here adopt this? This is sort of what I think, Lydia, your comment was in a different context around community engagement, but here it is in terms of the metric aspect. But that might be one way we could look at this. Do we feel that the agencies have been deficient? Some of them have, in that others were able to adopt some of these, and some of them could not. I mean, this is just, I don't know, that's what came to my mind when I first looked at the matrix here. I was kind of surprised to find how isolated some of these were at the bottom half of the page, and that all of the agencies hadn't been able to pick up on that. Things like projects in or near EJ communities, or public trainings on how to participate. You know, why wouldn't that be something that gets carried across every single agency?
And what about state agencies that don't seem to be part of this strategy? Like DOT.
No, that's a great point, Lydia. And we heard a comment today about the housing authority and how we could pull them in. I mean, it's very clear to me. I feel there are three main agency secretariats that we need to pull into this process to be more holistic and to form an interagency working group. I mean, that's not that they are mentioned in the strategy under the EEA section, I believe. So I would identify those as MassDOT, DPH, and housing. there's of course an aspect of labor and workforce development. There's an aspect of education for sure. But if I were to look sort of at the core partners with EEA, it would be those three at this point.
Peter Monte here. Quick question on that one. With the ones you just mentioned, I know it was referenced, but it wasn't one. But the Massachusetts Department of Public Health as well. Would that be one that would have a role to play in here also?
Yeah, for sure, Peter. I mean, that's what when the Department of Public Health, Housing, and MassDOT. Those are the three that I think. Yeah, those are the. And again, I think the others have a part too, but that's really those three, I think, are our closest partners so far. So I don't know, one thing that I wanted to say is one way we could use this matrix and I'm, I want people to jump in with some opinions here is, does it make sense for us to sort of go down what has already been identified here for a metric and say, why couldn't all of these agencies, we could go down we could go across the column here and say, well, why couldn't CZM require the same thing? This could be, we could decide as the EJ Council that our comments are that we should across the board suggest that all the agencies do these specific count projects in and near EJ communities, or public trainings on how to participate, or count the number of translation requests and fulfill. We could just require that across the board we could suggest that in our comments as something that should be adopted by EEA. So that was one, I think, very immense use of this matrix. And are there others, that we feel should be added to this column? I think that the matrix has captured what folks have said on this topic. The enforcement actions, the citing decisions might be ones that we add. I'm just going to scroll down further so you can see all of them.
Ari's hand is up.
Yeah, I just want to say that I agree with Rishi 100%. They should be, we should make that requirement, and it's also, that'll show some accountability.
That's one comment, that's a possibility. I'm just, when we think about, I just want to talk about as well, Madeline's comment about holding a staff, having a staff person at every agency that's held accountable for this type of community engagement and who's given adequate funds. That could be a game changer as well. We have about 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes left. I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of how we might do this. This is seeming a bit unwieldy to me in terms of, we have about 7 pages, 7 pages of comments here individually that's come in from all of you. How should we handle this for next time if we're trying to consolidate it into a document that we might want to submit as the EJC comments?
Rishi, maybe we could take a little guidance from other processes where we split up into kind of subgroups that address certain topics, so that we kind of divide it and conquer in terms of all these different comments, and the members here can self-select or be assigned certain sections so that we could kind of work through, because I think it's not, like you said, it's not going to be an easy task to go through all of these.
Yeah.
How to incorporate, so maybe we can have subcommittee meetings and in terms of open meeting law, I know we have to be mindful of that, but perhaps as long as we are, hewing to the open meeting laws, and maybe doing some subcommittee work, we can address them with the attention that each of those topics deserve.
I mean, I'm feeling similarly, Madeline, like it's so much information. It's pretty unwieldy that this does seem to me to be a natural place for us to split up into subcommittees where people can use their areas of expertise in these different. And I mean, we might just split it up according to these topics that are here, that are already part of that background document. We could just assign folks to each one. And then we run across this other issue then about, we were taking public comment, the public comment period up until January 27th into account. It may be that what we want to do is perhaps not submit. I'm just putting this out there, but not submit something as a formal comment, but then that we could continue to have these subcommittee at each of these subjects. And that we don't have something that is like a product, like, a set of comments that we're submitting, but it would be something a little different in the way that this group is, advising the secretary according to its statutory mandate. So I don't know, I wanted to just put that all out there.
I like the idea, this is Lydia. I like the idea of us breaking into smaller working groups. Yeah. I think that's a good idea. Let's do that. But maybe we can do a little bit of both. Have the smaller working groups and have those develop into, advisory mini groups, as you're saying, but also in terms of us having a comment, maybe as the working groups focus on their area, each can also think about some of these overall comments. And I think it might be good for us to submit at least some overall comments, because even the discussion that we've been having today, I think, is helpful to put forward some of those ideas. And it just won't be like, it's not going to be like, this is all we have to say on the whole EJ strategy, but here's some initial overarching comments that we have. And will continue to be a resource in all these areas or something like that.
So it'd be a parallel track in a way. Lydia, we would have something that we could hand in as a set of comments, but that to me connotes a bit of a long-term commitment to a subcommittee. Like, we would sign up for a particular subcommittee, but there would be some type of commitment there towards learning more about that specific issue in which you may already have some expertise. So is that kind of the model you're thinking about?
Yeah.
I mean, we could take a straw poll about that. I don't know if there were other folks that had other thoughts.
This is Marcos. I think I agree with Lydia's instinct, or to say her argument, that we should submit something, because I think what we have here is valuable, and I think it's relatively clear, even just as it is, even though it's a lot, because the document's a lot. But the other thing is, I like the idea that we have an insight or other privileged ability to command the attention of EEA to kind of highlight the things that we think are really important, or to elaborate maybe on these issues if we continue to look at it. So I could see, I would advocate putting something out within the time frame for comments, but also maybe continuing to look at that. And I would hope that as a council, we would also be engaged with the first report when it comes out to, you know, as a point of conversation. It would be very interesting.
Okay. Could we take a quick straw poll on this and see if we have some agreement on it? Madeline? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, Melissa,
Yes, I agree. Great idea.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Caroline,
Yes.
Lydia, yes.
Yeah.
Marcos, yes. Peter,
Yes.
okay, and then Pat. She has to jump off. She may have had to jump off. Okay. And Ari.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, I like this idea. We have literally 1 minute left. I mean, do folks want to split up into these, you know, commit themselves to a subcommittee here by subject, or should we do that by email? If folks could write in.
If it's okay to do it by email, that gives us a little more time.
Let's do that, Lydia. If folks can send in to Val and myself, so that each of these is a heading to a, you know, an issue. Maybe Val and I could send out an email that clarifies this. We will name the subgroup, and we will ask folks to identify what they might like, what subcommittee they'd like to be on as first and second choices. And we could do it by that way on email, and then we could make sure that we have a good distribution for the topics that are identified here. I feel like I need to give it a little more thought, along with Valerie and Carlene, our other deputy director, on the way that we might fashion the comments. So let us do that in this interim time, but please expect an email from us about separating out into subcommittees here around this. And also we can perhaps get some more information on the way that those subcommittees would have to interact with the open meeting law as well, like how we would have to go forward with that. So, okay. We're a minute or two over, so I just want to thank you all for your time today. This was kind of an unusual meeting, and it brought home to me how big this task is, for sure. So I want to thank you all again for your time and your participation. Thank you to the interpreters, and thank you to the staff from EEA that is doing the recording here for us, so that we'll be able to post this online for everyone. I hope everyone's taking some time off at the end of the year, and we'll see you in January and be in touch before then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.